At 5:40 the evening, on the 1st of July 1944, the war in Western Europe had already decided its outcome, whether Berlin would admit it or not. In a quiet headquarters near Paris, the late summer light fell across maps of Normandy crowded with red and blue pins. Each marker represented men already dead, dying, or about to be sacrificed for ground that could no longer be held. When the telephone rang, it carried the voice of Wilhelm Keitel from the Wolf's Lair, speaking for a leader who demanded certainty where none existed. 25 days had passed since D-Day. The Allies were no longer clinging to beaches. They were building an industrial pipeline of men, tanks, and fuel into France. Cherbourg had fallen. British forces were grinding toward Caen. German divisions were dissolving faster than replacements could arrive. The sky belonged to the enemy. The sea belonged to the enemy. And the front was shrinking by the hour. Keitel asked the question Adolf Hitler had been asking for weeks: what should be done? Gerd von Rundstedt, the most senior field marshal in the German army, did not hesitate. After a lifetime of studying war, he understood what the maps already said. His answer was blunt, undiplomatic, and fatal to his career: end the war. Why did one of Germany's most experienced commanders reach that conclusion so early, and why did speaking the truth cost him everything? Gerd von Rundstedt did not arrive at Normandy as a gambler or an ideologue. He arrived as a professional shaped by half a century of soldiering, formed by the rigid traditions of the Prussian officer corps. Born into a family where military service was not a choice but an obligation, he entered the German army as a cadet at 16 and spent his entire adult life studying how wars were actually fought, how armies moved, how logistics sustained them, and how illusions collapse under pressure. By the time Adolf Hitler came to power, Rundstedt was already one of the most senior generals in Germany. He was not a Nazi, never joined the party, and privately regarded Hitler with aristocratic contempt. Yet he served, not out of belief, but out of a conception of duty that placed loyalty to the state and the army above moral or political judgment. When Germany went to war, Rundstedt did what he had always done. He fought it, and he fought it well. His early campaigns cemented his reputation. In Poland in 1939, his forces advanced with speed and coordination that shattered Polish defenses in weeks. In France in 1940, he commanded Army Group A through the Ardennes, exploiting a gap the Allies believed impassable. The result was one of the most decisive victories in modern military history. In 1941, leading Army Group South into the Soviet Union, his troops captured vast territory and encircled entire Soviet armies. On paper, Rundstedt appeared to embody German military genius, but he also saw what others refused to acknowledge. The Soviet Union did not collapse. Losses that should have broken an army only produced new formations. Factories moved east and continued to build tanks and aircraft. By the winter of 1941, the limits of Germany's strength were visible to anyone willing to look. When Rundstedt ordered a withdrawal from Rostov to save his army, Hitler exploded. Retreats were forbidden. Rundstedt was dismissed for the first time, learning a lesson that would define the rest of the war. Honesty carried consequences. Germany needed him back. In 1942, Hitler recalled Rundstedt and placed him in command of the Western Front. His task was staggering: defend nearly 3,000 miles of coastline from Norway to Spain with an army already bleeding to death in the east. On paper, dozens of divisions stood ready. In reality, many were under strength, poorly equipped, or filled with older conscripts and coerced foreign troops. The Luftwaffe no longer controlled the skies. The Kriegsmarine had lost the Atlantic. Allied bombers struck German industry day and night. Rundstedt understood the mathematics. Germany could not be strong everywhere. Choices had to be made. His solution followed classical doctrine: hold armored divisions in reserve, positioned inland, ready to strike once the enemy revealed his main effort. Armor spread thinly along the coast would be decisive nowhere. Erwin Rommel disagreed. Having watched Allied air power destroy columns in North Africa, Rommel believed that once the Allies landed, German tanks would never reach the beaches alive. The invasion had to be crushed at the waterline, or it would not be crushed at all. Both men were right, and Hitler resolved the argument in the worst possible way. He kept control of key panzer divisions for himself. When the invasion came, the men who could see the battlefield would need permission from a leader 1,000 miles away who could not. The stage was set for catastrophe. The invasion came before dawn, on the 6th of June, 1944. Along a 50-mile stretch of the Normandy coast, the sea itself seemed to rise against Europe. Nearly 7,000 ships filled the channel. More than 11,000 aircraft ruled the sky. Before the sun reached the horizon, German positions were already shaking under naval gunfire and airborne landings deep in their rear. This was not a raid. It was the invasion. At Utah Beach, American forces landed with fewer losses than expected. At Omaha, the situation bordered on disaster as German infantry and artillery tore into the assault waves, killing and wounding thousands in the opening hours. British and Canadian troops fought their way ashore at Gold, Juno, and Sword. By nightfall, more than 150,000 Allied soldiers stood on French soil. Behind the beaches, airborne troops had seized bridges, road junctions, and key terrain, throwing German rear areas into confusion. Gerd von Rundstedt grasped the situation immediately. Paratroopers had not been dropped to support a diversion. Naval bombardment of this scale did not accompany feints. This was the decisive blow everyone had been waiting for. He sent urgent requests to release the armored reserves, the Panzer Division, and the 12th SS Panzer Division while time still mattered. Every hour of delay allowed the Allies to thicken their defenses and expand their foothold. The requests went unanswered. In Bavaria, Adolf Hitler slept. He had stayed up late watching films, sedated by medication, and had left strict orders not to be disturbed. The Panzer divisions remained motionless, their engines cold, their crews waiting for permission that did not come. By the time Hitler finally woke near midday, the window for decisive action was already narrowing. Even then, he hesitated. Convinced that Normandy was a diversion, Hitler believed the real invasion would strike at Pas-de-Calais. Allied deception operations, Operation Fortitude, had convinced German intelligence that a phantom army under George Patton waited across the channel. When authorization finally arrived late in the afternoon, reality asserted itself. What should have been a rapid concentration turned into a grinding crawl under constant attack. Only the 21st Panzer Division, positioned close enough to act on its own, launched a counterattack that evening. One battle group even reached the coast between British beaches, but it lacked the strength to exploit the breakthrough. By nightfall, it withdrew after losing more than half its tanks. The moment to drive the Allies back into the sea was gone. Rundstedt watched the reports arrive hour by hour. Each delay strengthened the enemy. Each failed movement confirmed what he already knew. Decisions were being made by a man who had never commanded troops in battle, who relied on colored pins instead of lived reality. From that moment forward, the battle was no longer about stopping the invasion. It was about how long Germany could delay the inevitable, and how many lives would be spent pretending otherwise. The days that followed D-Day confirmed every fear Gerd von Rundstedt had tried to articulate. The Allied bridgehead did not shrink, it hardened. With each sunrise, more men came ashore, more tanks rolled off landing craft, more artillery found firing positions. What had begun as vulnerable footholds became fortified lodgements, layered with steel, wire, and guns. German counterattacks came piecemeal and failed one after another. The panzer divisions that Rundstedt had wanted to preserve for mobile warfare were now being fed into static defensive battles around Caen and the hedgerows of Normandy. Tanks designed for rapid maneuver were pinned down by naval gunfire, pulverized by artillery, and hunted relentlessly by Allied fighter bombers. Veteran crews men who had taken years to train were lost in days. None could be replaced. Cherbourg became the first decisive symbol of collapse. On June 18, American forces cut off the Cotentin Peninsula, isolating the port that Hitler had ordered held at all costs. The garrison fought with determination, but determination could not withstand sustained bombardment and methodical infantry assaults. The city fell on June 26 and 27. Within weeks, American engineers would begin turning the shattered harbor into a logistical artery capable of sustaining an entire army. The war in the West was no longer a gamble, it was an equation that Germans could not solve. Meanwhile, British forces continued their grinding advance toward Caen. Operation Epsom pushed them to within miles of the city, before being halted by desperate German resistance. But stopping the attack consumed the armored reserve at an unsustainable rate. Every day Caen remained contested. Germany paid in tanks, fuel, and trained crews it could never recover. The ground was held, but at a price that guaranteed future defeat. Rundstedt understood the pattern. The German army was bleeding to death for terrain that would eventually be abandoned anyway. Reinforcements that should have arrived in days took weeks, delayed by Allied air attacks on railways and bridges. The French resistance cut telephone lines, ambushed convoys, and fed intelligence directly to Allied headquarters. Daylight movement became nearly impossible. The front stabilized, but only in the enemy's favor. On June 17, Rundstedt and Erwin Rommel confronted Hitler in a bunker far behind the lines. Rommel spoke with brutal clarity. Casualties were running far ahead of replacements. Air superiority made movement suicidal. Unless something changed, the front would collapse. He raised the unthinkable possibility of seeking a political solution before total destruction removed any chance of negotiation. Hitler erupted. He spoke of willpower, of miracle weapons, of faith overcoming arithmetic. Retreat was forbidden. Every inch of ground was to be held to the last man. The conference ended without resolution, without relief, and without hope. Rundstedt said little. He had learned that facts carried no weight when they contradicted belief. As he returned to France, watching the situation deteriorate hour by hour, he understood that Germany was no longer fighting a war of strategy. It was fighting against reality itself, and reality never loses. The telephone call on the 1st of July 1944 was not an outburst of frustration. It was a diagnosis. When Gerd von Rundstedt told Wilhelm Keitel to end the war, he was not surrendering to emotion, he was acknowledging arithmetic. The beaches were secure. The ports were falling. The skies and seas belonged to the enemy. Germany no longer possessed the material strength, the freedom of movement, or the strategic flexibility required to change the outcome. What remained was only the scale of the destruction still to come. For that honesty, Rundstedt was removed within days. Officially, it was age and health. In reality, it was truth. What followed proved every word he had spoken to be correct. Operation Cobra shattered the German front. The Falaise pocket annihilated entire armies. Paris fell. In a final, desperate gamble, Hitler launched the Ardennes offensive, an attack Rundstedt opposed from the beginning. It achieved surprise, then collapsed exactly as he predicted, burning through Germany's last reserves of men, fuel, and armor for no strategic gain. By the spring of 1945, the war was reduced to delay and denial. Bridges fell. The Rhine was crossed. Berlin burned. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8. Hitler was dead. The country lay in ruins. Nearly 40 million people across Europe had been killed, including 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust. The war that Rundstedt had declared lost in early July consumed 10 more months and countless lives without altering the final result by a single degree. Rundstedt himself survived the war, though not its judgment. He was captured, charged, and ultimately released due to failing health. He never wrote memoirs. He never sought absolution. He died quietly in 1953, buried beneath a simple stone that said nothing about victories, failures, or the words that cost him his command. His story leaves an uncomfortable lesson. Professional competence is not moral innocence. Serving a criminal system faithfully still enables its crimes. Yet his fate also exposes a deeper danger, one that extends far beyond the battlefield. Organizations that punish truth and reward comforting lies do not merely make bad decisions. They lose the ability to see reality at all. By the time facts become undeniable, correction is no longer possible. End the war, Rundstedt said, because he understood what happens when belief replaces evidence and loyalty silences judgment. The war did not end. It devoured everything left to devour. What do you think is the most important lesson this moment in history still offers us today? Share your thoughts below. If these stories matter to you, consider subscribing, because the battle may be over, but history is still being written.